You snap at someone over something minor. You withdraw mid-conversation without being able to explain why. You feel irrationally irritated by a noise or a question that would not normally bother you at all. The people around you think you are angry, but a licensed clinical psychologist says something else entirely might be happening, and understanding the difference changes how you respond to it. Emotional overstimulation is when the nervous system takes in more input than it can effectively process in a given moment. That input can be external, noise, demands, conversations, notifications, or it can be internal, emotional content, intrusive thoughts, unprocessed stress. When the system becomes flooded, the tolerance window narrows dramatically. Things that would normally pass without registering suddenly feel enormous. The responses this produces, snapping, withdrawing, shutting down, can look exactly like anger from the outside. But the mechanism is different, and so is what actually helps. This is not a rare or unusual experience. A consumer survey found that 71% of Americans experience overstimulation. The numbers increase by generation. 85% of Gen Z report feeling a low bandwidth to handle things, and 82% of millennials report the same. In a world of constant notifications, multitasking, and relentless information flow, the nervous system is being asked to process more than it was designed to handle continuously. And the symptoms that result are often misread, both by the person experiencing them and by the people around them. A psychologist is direct about the nature of this experience. Being overstimulated is not a character flaw. It is a capacity issue. The body is giving information that the system is flooded, and when the system is flooded, tolerance narrows. Here are the 9 signs that someone is emotionally overstimulated rather than simply angry, and why each one makes sense given what is happening in the nervous system. The first sign is snapping. When someone is overstimulated, they may snap in response to something minor that would not normally bother them at all. This can look like irritability or anger, but it is actually the response of a system that has run out of processing space. There is no emotional reserve left to absorb the small additional input, so even a trivial thing triggers a disproportionate reaction. The second sign is sudden withdrawal. A person who is overstimulated may pull back from a conversation or from the environment without being able to explain why. This is the nervous system signaling a need to reduce incoming input, not a social rejection or an expression of hostility toward the people present. The third sign is irrational irritation. Feeling irrationally irritated by noise, by questions, by sensory input that would normally be neutral is a hallmark of overstimulation. The irritation is real. The perception that it is disproportionate is also real. Both things are true simultaneously, which is part of what makes this state confusing to navigate from the inside. The fourth sign is tearfulness that feels disproportionate to the situation. Crying over something that does not warrant the emotional response is a sign that the system has exceeded its capacity. The tears are not really about the specific trigger. They are the overflow of an accumulation of unprocessed input that has reached the limit of what the nervous system can hold without discharging. The fifth sign is decision paralysis. When overstimulated, a person may have genuine trouble making even simple decisions. This happens because decision-making requires cognitive resources, and those resources are being consumed by the effort of managing the flooded nervous system. The capacity for clear, sequential thinking is reduced when the system is in this state. The sixth sign is a strong urge to be alone or to leave the environment. This is one of the most direct expressions of what the nervous system needs when it is overstimulated, a reduction in incoming stimulation. The urge to escape is not antisocial behavior. It is the body accurately communicating what it needs to begin recovering. The seventh sign is physical tension. Overstimulation is not only emotional. It manifests physically as clenching the jaw, tightening the shoulders, pacing, shallow breathing, heat in the face or chest, a racing heart. These are the physiological markers of a nervous system in a state of activation, and they are real physical experiences rather than imagined ones. The eighth sign is difficulty communicating. When overstimulated, a person may be unable to articulate what is wrong or why they are upset. This is not evasiveness or stonewalling. The cognitive and linguistic processing required to describe an emotional state accurately is impaired when the system is flooded. The words genuinely are not accessible in the way they normally would be. The ninth sign is shutting down rather than engaging. Instead of entering a conflict to repair it, the overstimulated person may simply go offline, become unresponsive, monosyllabic, or completely withdrawn. This is the nervous system moving into a freeze response rather than fight or flight. It looks passive or dismissive from the outside. It is actually the system doing what it needs to do to survive the moment. Now here is the part that matters most, the difference between overstimulation and sensory overload, because they are often confused. Sensory overload is primarily related to the five senses and tends to be environmental. Overstimulation is broader. You can be sitting in a quiet room and still feel emotionally overstimulated if your internal world is loud. Relational tension, multitasking, emotional labor, decision fatigue, and unprocessed stress all contribute to overstimulation without any external noise or sensory input being present. This distinction matters because it explains why removing yourself from a loud environment does not always resolve the state. If the source is internal, environmental changes alone are not sufficient. People with anxiety, attentional difficulties, neurodivergence, and trauma histories tend to experience emotional overstimulation more frequently and at lower thresholds than others. For these individuals, the bandwidth for handling accumulating input is narrower to begin with, which means the system reaches its limit faster and with less overall input. For calming down when overstimulated, the psychologist's guidance is specific and important. You cannot cognitively reason your way out of a physiologically activated state. The body has to come down first. Stepping away from stimulation, lengthening the exhale, putting both feet flat on the floor, and splashing cool water on the face are strategies that work directly on the physiological state rather than trying to think through it. The exhale in particular activates the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the system responsible for calming the body down after activation. Therapy helps with overstimulation, specifically because it builds the capacity to differentiate specific emotions from generalized overwhelm, to regulate the body more effectively, and to examine the lifestyle patterns that keep someone in a state of chronic overstimulation. Over time, it expands the nervous system's capacity to handle input without exceeding its threshold as quickly. There is one more layer worth adding, because it reframes how overstimulation is often interpreted in relationships. When someone you care about snaps, withdraws, shuts down, or becomes irritable in ways that feel disproportionate, the default interpretation is that they are angry at you specifically, or that they are being unreasonable, or that something is wrong with the relationship. The psychologist's framework suggests a different starting point, that the person's nervous system may simply be flooded, and what looks like interpersonal hostility is actually a capacity problem rather than a relational one. Responding to someone who is overstimulated by trying to resolve the content of the conflict, pressing for explanation, or demanding engagement is often counterproductive. The system cannot process those inputs at that moment because it is already beyond capacity. The more useful response is to reduce incoming stimulation, give space without abandonment, and return to the conversation once the physiological state has calmed. Understanding what overstimulation actually is changes what kind of support is helpful, and it shifts the interpretation of behavior that might otherwise escalate a situation that did not need to escalate at all. New videos every day covering the mental health science that helps you understand yourself and the people around you better. Subscribe and stay with us.